I'm Michael. I'm the Chief Vision Officer for accessiBe, and I'm really glad you came by. I'm glad you're here, and we'll have, I hope, some interesting things to talk about. But I'd first like to introduce Curtis Chong. I should say that I am the Chief Vision Officer for accessiBe, which means I get to be out in front of a lot of things, which has its pluses and its minuses, but it's a lot of fun. But with me today is somebody I've known forever. The thing about both of us is we've been dealing with technology since the 1970s. So I don't want to hear any comments from anyone about being too old or older than dirt, because experience counts for a lot.
That's right.
Right, Curtis? So I'd like you to meet Curtis Chong.
Yes, I've known Michael since 1974, and we've both been involved in one fashion or another in efforts to enhance Braille and speech technology. That was at the beginning, and then to go forward now to try to interweave all of that into the mainstream world, since everybody else is now using technology, and it is no longer in the back rooms hiding behind a secure door that nobody else can get through. So that's my background.
And I've been dealing with assistive technology in official capacities ever since working with Ray Kurzweil and the National Federation of the Blind to develop the original Kurzweil reading machine, which also set the tone for consumer involvement in a lot of different areas dealing with technology. And I want to start by saying that today we are not here to sell you any products. We are here, however, to give you a takeaway, and if you want to call it such, to sell you on a concept, which is what we're calling the accessibility gap. So what is this thing that you've registered to hear about called the accessibility gap? It's really the same sort of thing that we see as blind people and that persons with disabilities in general tend to encounter, and that is that there is a major gulf between what we as so-called persons with disabilities encounter and what the rest of the world has access to. And that gulf is that we don't get the same access to things that others do. And today we're going to talk about the internet specifically and the World Wide Web, because there is a major gap between what most people get online and on the net, or however they get there, and what we tend to get. Blind people, and I'm going to talk about blind people mainly here, but in one way or another, this translates across to any disability, but we'll deal with blindness today, if that's all right. Mainly because Curtis and I are blind, and we know more about that than anything else. At least I think we do. And so we're going to talk about the world in those terms to a degree, but the concepts go across the board. So we get no access really to graphics from the outset of what people do when they create a website. We don't get access to a lot of the content because the website developers, that is the people who make website building software and so on, don't have any kind of accessibility automatically or mandated wise built into what they do. So people nowadays are creating websites at an incredible rate. I think the last number I heard was something like over 380 websites per minute, which translates into something like 500,000 websites a day. And that's a lot of websites. And the problem is that the number of people who can make those websites accessible, that is, who have the technical knowledge, is very limited. And their knowledge and their expertise really goes to all aspects of the whole accessibility issue. That is, some are better at it than others. But nevertheless, there aren't that many of them. And the result is that we don't have a lot of access to many different kinds of things. People are creating websites at this incredible rate because they're easy. We got website builders, CMS technologies. There are just a lot of things. People can easily create WordPress sites and so on. That's a very fast and somewhat automated process. And we don't get access to that stuff, which is part of the issue that we all face in the world, right, Curtis? Or you want to say
Well,
anything?
I would I would clarify that, at least in my mind. It's not that we don't have any access to all of the websites that are out there. It's that we are more likely than not to run into difficulty with either all of it, depending upon how the pages are put up, or parts of it. And sometimes the parts that are not accessible are trivial and they don't matter in terms of the task that I, as a blind person, am interested in performing. And at other times, the task that I want to perform is vital to my completion of something. So, for example, if I'm going to an employer's website and filling in or submitting a job application or a resume, I might get all the way through uploading all of my content to the site, but then there's a button that says submit. And that little teeny weeny button that says submit could be one that you cannot activate with the keyboard. And it is not because these people, that the people who are making websites deliberately set out to, well, hey, let's put up a barrier and get those blind people. We don't want them. We just keep them off of our website. No, that's not how it is at all. A lot of these things that get in our way are what I would call unintentional barriers for the most part, which are created because they're using the latest development tool or they're trying to be fancy and they're doing something and nobody finds out that it doesn't work until a real life blind person or a person with disability tries to do something and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we have a problem. And of course, given the low number of blind people, I mean, it's a significant chunk of the population when you think about it in one way, but we're a pretty small group. And so we're not going to touch as a population every single one of the websites, accessible or inaccessible, that are out there until we do, and then all of a sudden it becomes an issue. So I don't get the feeling, that the web is overwhelmingly barred from me. What I get the feeling of is I don't know for absolute sure whether the next website I want to access, and mostly you as a blind person, if you're out there looking, let's say, for articles about a certain topic, this is where you might visit 10, 20, or 30 websites in the course of half an hour because you're reading different articles about a topic in which you are interested. Then you're going to notice or wonder how many of those 30 sites are sufficiently well put together that we can at least glean what we want out of them, or kick our way through the parts that don't work and get the essential stuff that we want.
Yeah,
I don't get the, yeah, yeah,
you put it very well as
yeah.
muscling through,
Muscling
and
through. Yes, that's exactly
and
what we wind up doing.
and that's exactly right. And the problem is that even if we can muscle through and get some content and get some information, what we don't know is what we don't know. That is to say, there are many times on a website for us as blind people where information um, is given, but it's done in a way that we don't tend to see it, or there are menus, or there are other elements that aren't accessible. So the problem is that it comes down to the fact that most people don't know what to do to make the website world available to us. And we're not in an ideal situation. That is, if we were really dealing with a truly ideal world, the people who create the tools that develop websites would need to and would have to provide access automatically as part of that. They would have to build that in so that there would be no way that you could create a website without it being fully accessible to all. And that's not what happens. And
Well, I
even,
mean, I submit, Michael, that the problem also exists with our access technology, with our
sure,
screen readers, right? It's not, it's because right now, the fundamental underpinning of the whole access arena for the blind has been the ability to take text or to find text or to do something with it and to send it off to a speech system or to send it off to a braille device or both. The whole infrastructure of screen access technology, 99% of it is focused on this concept of grab the text and render that. What the screen reader software is incapable of doing for the most part. I mean, yeah, you hear about things like JAWS with the Picture Smart, and you hear about JAWS and other NVDA with the OCR. OCR means optical character recognition, where you can read the print. But the intelligence in the screen reader is not like a person who, you know, if I hire a human being who I think of as smart, competent, literate, and articulate, and I used to do this a lot more than I do now, to read what's on the screen to me. That person can look at the picture and say, this is a picture of an Etzel with a license plate number, da 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 da. Okay, so they make some human judgments, but the screen readers are incapable of doing that right now also. So I want to emphasize
Right.
that point as well. It's a balancing act, actually.
So there's a lot that goes into it. And look, this goes across other disabilities as well in terms of issues that we all face. If you happen to be a person with epilepsy and you go to a website where there are blinking things that are trying to attract your attention to parts of those sites, those can cause seizures. Or if you're a low vision person and you don't have some of the technology that ideally would be great for you to have, you may not be able to change the contrast of the text and or change the font sizes. And those are issues that website developers also need to deal with, because it isn't necessarily automatically done in some other way. So there's just a lot of access that needs to be done.
And then
And
there is the dimension, another contributor to the accessibility gap is the proficiency with which the technology is used by the blind or otherwise disabled individual
person,
person. Yeah, because in the world of the blind, in order to use a lot of this stuff, there are a lot of, mouse people just take their pointer and find an icon or something and they click on it. They have to memorize some things, but mostly they don't have to memorize things like, what's the keyboard command to go to the top of the screen? What's the keyboard command to go to the bottom? How do I activate a link? And that is something that is intrinsic with our, uh, not just the technology, but the training programs that we rely on as blind people to learn the very specific techniques that we use non-visually that are not taught anywhere else. So that's a contributing factor too.
the problem is that ultimately what it comes down to is that for us to be able to fully deal with access and access technology today, we have to be pretty technically savvy compared to most people that use the web. And that's not even dealing with some of the other issues that contribute to the gap, the cost. So if I go off and create a simple website, I can go to like Shopify or somewhere, maybe on Amazon, and create a site. Maybe it'll cost 20 bucks, maybe it'll cost $100. There's nothing that makes that site accessible. So then how do I get it to be accessible? Well, I'm going to have to find somebody who knows, assuming I'm even aware enough to think about access. But typically, most people want to get their sites up, they want to start selling products and so on. And so the bottom line is they don't know about accessibility anyway.
And the
And
irony here is the simpler in design the site is, the less
the
elegant it
easier it
is, the
is.
less complicated development tool, the higher the likelihood that it will actually work out of the box with little extra effort on our
Right.
part. The
Right.
more complicated ones, the ones that use the slides that change at random, or the ones that have layers of software between the actual, where the developer doesn't know anything about alt text, for example, for
Right.
graphics. Those are the ones that will cause us trouble. So the
But
more
there's
sophisticated, the worse it becomes,
but
actually.
there but the problem is that the building tools are encouraging a lot more of those complexities: menus, slides, tables, graphs,
Yep.
other things that tend to be a problem. And so they're making the inclusion of a lot of those elements in a website a lot easier to bring about, which then goes off and tends to make the sites less inclusive.
Yep.
And so how do you deal with that? Well, you eventually have one of two options. Well, one of three options. You just ignore it. Another option is you realize, oh, maybe there are other people out here who aren't able to access my website. And I've heard about this whole access thing and I
You're
want
talking
to
about
go
you
deal
as
with it.
in the purveyor of the site, not the
The
end user?
purveyor of the site, right.
Okay, all right.
And the third is that you, as the purveyor of the site, suddenly get a letter saying, we're going to sue you because your website's not accessible. And unfortunately, that's happening all too often.
Well,
But
the
I
question
like,
is too, how are we the end users, the ones who ultimately get hurt or helped by what they do, dealing with it? Because
well,
it's not as if we're living in a universe where nothing gets done or we don't,
right,
you know, some of the enterprising forward, blind people who are just trying to get by, living their lives normally, if they have enough motivation and if the confidence in themselves has not been bred out of them, will make a determination. How much more effort do I want to invest in this in order to get what I want? Because that's a lot of what happens. You remember when we used to live in the world of only print, right? Where
right,
nothing was accessible in print. Uh, there were some who couldn't handle that, and there were others who had strategies in place to figure out what to do with the print involving the use of a person that you hired or more than one person. Uh, Now, do I want to go back to that?
no,
Absolutely not. We don't, right? We want access to the technology because it's so intrinsic to our lives now. You can't even visit your doctor without going online. You can't shop for necessities these days half the time without getting online or file a complaint or apply for a job, right? So the need to get at this digital infrastructure is a lot more significant and a lot more pervasive now because you can't live your life, without getting online, without using email. Our society looks askance at people who don't have access to the web.
right.
And a lot of opportunities are denied to a chunk of the population who doesn't have access to the web because so many companies just offer it. So we have to accept that as a reality in order to go on to the next part that I know you want to talk about, which is how do we get across this gap to try to get as close as we can to something that enables us to do what we need to do online just like everybody else. Because I submit too that it's not just the people with disabilities who have this problem.
Sure.
It's economically disadvantaged people, people who live in areas where you don't have the internet, people without Wi-Fi, all
Well,
this other kind of stuff. But we're
or
focusing, I know,
people
on the,
who
yeah,
or
you
people
know,
who grew up without the internet and now they're thrust into this. I
yes,
mean, look at seniors who are in a position where they have to start using smartphones and uh, computers and do all this stuff online, and a number of them don't know how to do it and are having to be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And so how does all that get fixed? Well, the answer is that in the traditional sense of the word, the developers, the people who create the websites, the people who create the tools that create the websites, that whole environment tries to make access as easy as possible for all of these people. And there are a lot of books and training tools and other kinds of things that most people can have access to. Now, there are going to be the Luddites that resist, but people are oftentimes able to find ways to get access to some of that stuff. And whether they like it or not, they will learn enough to get by. And there again, we get left out of that to a large degree as people who happen to have disabilities, and especially blind people, because the material is just not made available. So we get back to what you just said. We really need to talk about next is, so how in the world do we start to close that gap? What are the various ways that we deal with making the internet more accessible and narrow that gap?
well, I don't think the answer is one. I mean, there is no one
Right.
single answer. There is a multiple, for example, not even referring to technology itself, if we could get it so that every single training program that teaches you how to develop the web would mandate that you have to pass a component dealing with accessibility. That would be one way. It's not the only way, but it would be a step. If we could make our screen reading technology more sophisticated and able to use at one time when we used to deal, you remember the 24 lines by 80 characters, text only screens, and we were even
Mm-hmm.
wrangling then about how do we give that information because it's more than just the letters and the words, it's what's highlighted, where's the little pointer, how do you convey all of that information to the end user? So
And
there's,
then we got pictures,
yeah, then we got
then we got
graphics, which
graphics,
contain text sometimes.
right?
And we got data representations, which visually are much more convenient, like especially now with the pandemic, you get tons of these graphs that show the trends of how many people have died over the last 6 months, how many people are getting better over the last 6 months. All that kind of stuff are data visualizations, which are bad enough in and of themselves, but it's worse when the people who put them up don't even label the links that bring them up to tell you which data visualization you're going to get, right?
So it's true that you can do some things with screen readers, that is specific assistive technology, but what do we do? And again, I am also agreeing with you that there is not one answer, but I think there are several answers that come up to one overall solution, which is awareness and desire. But what are some of the ways that the world of people who create and are involved in addressing the issue of having internet websites available, what are the ways that they can deal with the gap? Well, I can think of a couple, or I can think of a few. One is going back to something that you said, but taking it a step further, because even if you get trainers to be required to pass a component, that doesn't mean that they will build accessibility into it. And it also may mean that when they go to someone's website to build it, they'll say, here's what we can do, but we've got to use special expertise to put access in. So that's going to cost more money. And then somebody says, well, I can't afford to pay more money. So I think that the solution to that is that access has to be mandated right out of the box everywhere, with website development tools, with all of the technology that is involved with the internet. Having said that, that's not working very well for us because it isn't happening. It isn't happening very fast, but it's still the ultimate way that we want to do it. So what we have in the meanwhile are the people that you're talking about who get trained. And some of them do a better job than others. I think there's been even some studies lately that show that even among the coding environment, they don't necessarily always get it all that well. And so a lot of accessibility issues get left out, but that's still a solution. And if we
Partial.
had, it is a partial
It's
solution,
one
right?
component of the
It's a
solution.
component,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. So we have those folks, and it would be great if we could get 100 times as many of those folks as we have today. But even then, the problem with that partial solution is once you go in and you make a website accessible, you have another problem, which is what if I, as the website owner, go in and change something? So I'm a restaurant and I go in and I put up a new menu tomorrow over what's there today, or I want to change some other things. And typically I have the resources to do that easily because the tools allow for that. And hopefully when I hired you as a coder, you helped make sure that I could do things to my website that I need to do. But still, then when you get to access and there's nothing that mandates that access continue, suddenly what you as the coder created goes out of compliance. And so it's not a scalable solution, but it is a partial solution.
Well, I live in a place that's supposed to be for people who are 55 and older. And when they first started getting everybody online, they would put the restaurant menus up as a part of the body of the email, which worked
Mhm.
great until one day somebody discovered they could do a screen print of what would otherwise be an accessible document, and they would paste that in the email. And then if you were a blind person, you would find, if you were lucky, the graphic would be spoken, so you'd know there was a graphic there, but
Graphic,
otherwise your
right?
screen would indicate that there was nothing there. And you were left wondering what's going on with the menu, you
And
know?
I went the other way. I'm living in the Spring Valley Lake area of Victorville. So we have a country club and they have a restaurant and they started with screenshots and they send also texts every day with a screenshot of the menu. And I said, this isn't working for some of us. and got them to change so that now they still send the message with a screenshot, but they also email the menus every day, in text format, because there's no other way for me to read them. But the bottom line is, either way you go, people have to alter what they would normally do to make it possible for us to get access to it. And the coders can't keep up with that stuff, because it would drive so many people out of business if you had to keep somebody on constant retainer to fix access issues as they emerge because you've made changes in the site. So it's just not going to be a good end all solution. And, so where are we headed with that? Well, the bottom line is we need a solution that's more scalable and that can enhance what the coders do, or that can do a lot of the work that the experts already do that could be automated, and then they could do the stuff that an automated solution can't do. And the reality is that artificial intelligence is with us everywhere we go. And there's no reason not to take advantage of artificial intelligence
Yeah, there's a lot of
solutions.
reasons why you don't want to take advantage of artificial
Oh yeah,
intelligence because it's in its infancy now.
it is in its infancy,
Yeah.
but by the same token, it's there, and it isn't just artificial intelligence on the web. The fact is, we have artificial intelligence all around us, and like it or not, we are using it, even if it's in its infancy, and it's going to emerge and evolve. But by not using it, and not taking advantage of the capabilities that are in existence today, we're leaving out a potential component that can enhance what we do.
But you see, I subscribe to the school of technology has to earn our trust in
Correct.
order for it to be truly of benefit to people.
Right.
Because if I have spent all of my working life finding out what's wrong with a part of the technology that I was responsible for supporting. And
Right.
after you've fixed problems day after day after day after day, my team used to make, which we're all sighted people except for me, and we used to make jokes about how, well, gosh, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but we can't fire the missiles today because the mainframe just crashed.
Right.
And this is not something that AI is going to eliminate. It might reduce it, but remember, AI is created initially by fallible human beings who do make mistakes.
Right.
So anybody who says to me AI is going to be a tremendously successful fix to any kind of a problem, I got to tell you, I am willing to look at it. I'm willing to find
Exactly
out if
right.
that's true, but I'm not willing to go around and say to people, don't worry, AI is going to solve your
Right.
problems.
But
Because
all I'm
what'll
saying,
happen is it's no, well, here's the point. People will muck it up
yeah.
because of the way it's implemented, right?
Well,
That's because that's what we do, as they
but
say in the
conceptually
right.
speaking, AI can be a part of an enhancement or a part
It
of a
can.
solution. and
Yes.
and that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's going to be the end all solution. It hasn't progressed that far. I suppose we could say, if Ray Kurzweil is correct about the singularity, which by the way has now moved from the late 2020s to 2045, but if he's correct about the singularity and we all get chips implanted in us so that we interact with computers and so on, and so you marry the two, maybe that will fix it. But we're not there yet.
Nope.
And so we still deal with human fallibility, but AI is something that exists more today than it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it will be improved over the next 10 years or 15 years. And the fact is that it does exist and
Okay.
ought to be
So
explored as being a part of where we go as we deal with
speaking
trying to close the
conceptually,
gap.
Michael, let's talk about what AI can do today.
Okay.
I mean, you know what
Yeah.
some of those things are. So
Yeah.
want to give me some concrete examples of what an AI intervention, and let's focus on web accessibility. So what would
Okay.
AI, if let's just assume that there's no problems, that it's all working great. So in its
Well,
basic
that's a
terms,
good
what would
assumption,
a
I
let's talk, yeah,
suppose.
let's talk about some of the things that AI can do, because I am interested in knowing what the state of
Sure.
AI is right now.
So AI certainly can analyze a lot of things. So let's take a website. I love to use my website as an example, and you've been there and you've seen it. there are components on the website that were not alt tagged appropriately when the website was updated last August, one of which is a menu. And what shows up to my screen reader and to your screen reader is something that says it's a pop-up, but we can't access it easily. We can muscle through and do a lot of convolutions to finally get it to show up. But AI can recognize that that's supposed to be a menu, can look at what's in that menu, and it can provide a representation of that menu that I can then access.
That assumes, I mean, isn't there a basic assumption that is assumed, which is to say that the elements of the menu themselves are readable text,
It
so that
it
the
does.
elements of
Well,
the, what happens if the elements of the menu are pure pictures,
okay. And so then
right?
the answer is, and you're right. So then the answer is, if the pictures are differentiable, AI can tell the difference from one picture to another. How well it verbalizes those pictures is something that is going to be one of the ways that AI will improve. So let me talk about pictures. And again, I'll pick on my website.
Well, no, no, no. Let's back up a little because I
Oh,
want to be
okay.
positive about what you're
No,
talking about with the menu expansion. If the elements are text readable and the AI can detect that here's a collapsed
right,
menu and here are the
right,
parts of it, AI, what you're saying is then it can first of all, enable the blind person to expand
correct,
or contract the menu using fairly simple keyboard commands. That's one. And number two, the AI can read the elements
right.
of that menu with certain broad assumptions being operable, which I've already, which I highlighted earlier. So that's a plus for AI.
Yeah.
Okay, so I
So let's
get
go
that.
back to your menu with the pictures. And that's why,
Yeah,
and I was getting to that actually. I
yeah.
was using a picture on my website because there are a couple of pictures on the site. Let's say those were in a menu. Um, as opposed to, and let's say they represented different things, and the pictures were distinctly different enough that they wouldn't all be identified the same. AI can today make a stab at identifying those pictures. Will it be correct? Maybe. And again, using the picture that I was going to talk about, which isn't in a menu, but let's pretend it was. There is a picture that shows me with my guide dog from being in the World Trade Center on September 11th, Roselle. And the correct description of that picture is Michael Hinkson hugging Roselle. But the AI recognizes it to the point of saying man in black suit jacket hugging yellow Labrador retriever. So is that incorrect? It's not. It's correct as far as it goes. And AI doesn't yet have the sophistication without um, paying a lot of money to be able to do full facial recognition and so on. And some of those services exist. As we know, the police are taking advantage of some of those, but it's not a cheap thing and it's not an easy thing. But AI is getting to the point where even facial recognition is possible, albeit expensive. And if there were a number of those pictures on the menu and AI had the ability to do more accurate image recognition to put the right words with each of those images, then it would fully be able to verbalize that the way you would want it to be verbalized and I would want it to be verbalized. Today, it might not verbalize it exactly the way we want, but distinctive images can potentially be described. But that's evolving, and we know that.
Right, but so there's basic guidance that would need to be available to the owner of of a website that has never heard of people with disabilities
Exactly right.
from the people supplying, either the owner
Exactly right.
himself, is herself, itself, themselves are developing the AI solution, or they're piggybacking on somebody else's AI solution. And now you get into a judgment call. How much of the AI works for this particular thing versus what do we need to shore up with some human intervention,
And,
right? I
and the
mean,
reality
that's
is
where we
that's
are.
why none of these are full solutions in of themselves.
Yeah.
And you're bringing up the basic point, which is that really when we're talking about this, uh, there are things that an AI oriented solution can do, and there are things that a coder can do. And the reality is that we need to recognize collectively that both can enhance a website, not only design, but a website interaction positively for persons with disabilities
The word is
by
can.
working together.
I
Can.
agree with you.
Yeah,
It can.
it can.
And yeah, and
And there are a
my
lot of
concern
factors
about the
that,
can part is how many things can make it so that it can't.
well, and what will change something so that when it does, then somebody comes along and does something that breaks it again. You know, I was interviewed on a podcast recently, and the podcast operator mentioned a website called Podbean, PODBEAN.com, and he said I went to that site. He's a blind guy. Well, it's Jonathan Mosen. Some people may have heard of him. And anyway, he said, I went to Podbean and I saw that accessiBe was on the front page. And he said, that looked really great. I liked it. And it was very, very pleasurable to go there. But then I went to pricing page and it didn't do, that is accessiBe, which is the product that he saw, didn't do anything for me on that page. He said, so I was very disappointed. Well, as it turns out, after some investigation, they had done nothing on that page. The people who deal with Podbean had done nothing on that page to create accessibility. So there was an AI solution, and I don't know whether there was other coding that went along with it on the homepage, but it wasn't even on the pricing page. Why? That's a good mystery. But the reality is, if people don't work at bringing the accessibility, using all the tools that are available to them to a website, then we're back where we started. And that's why the can is absolutely the right way to put it.
It can do it, and I think that it would be fair to say that any solution that offers a 100% guarantee that something is going to happen needs to be looked at askance so that we can make sure, I don't care who the website owner is, some effort has to be ongoing, I think. Uh, Even if they adopt an AI solution or an overlay solution and they're paying somebody money, or if they're hiring a accessibility consultant, the reality is that most website owners are going to be what I call reactionary, which is to say, number one, I think we all agree they wouldn't think about accessibility, period. That's one. Unless somebody approaches them and says, one, either I have a partial solution that can help you, or number two, I used your site and the things that you're doing don't work. If they never hear either of those messages, right? Neither one of those messages. The concept of accessibility in today's world
Right.
isn't going to happen. Now, sometimes that won't be a problem. Why? Because maybe it's a simple website and
Right.
everything just comes up hunky-dory. Or other times it's very complicated and something doesn't work. And so there's this part of AI implementation and expert consultant implementation that involves the human factor, which I am a big fan of not forgetting, because if
Correct.
it's done wrong, see, here's what AI does and here's what all technology does. They magnify both the positives and the negatives.
Correct.
So, when AI or the computers do something wrong, they do it 1,000 times wrong. And when they do it right, they do it 1,000 times right. And so the effect, positive or negative, makes the seesaw swing more significantly in the right or the wrong direction, depending upon,
And
people.
as you said,
Yeah,
as it does with the programmers as well,
yeah,
and it's really very frustrating because if you screw it up, you really screw it up, and
yeah,
it's very
exactly.
frustrating. But the bottom line is, and I'm moving us along a little bit
Okay,
because I
that's
know
fine.
you only have about
You and I are
13
both
more
running out
minutes
of
to go,
time. Yeah, yeah,
and I really want to leave some time for questions. But I believe that AI can be part of a solution, and coders can be part of a solution, and we need and both sides need to address the issue of not only do we have to work together and should work together, but each side needs to embrace the concept that working together enhances our chances of having a more accessible process. And especially on the AI side, when people think, oh, if I just put this AI solution in, it's going to fix everything. We know that doesn't happen. And one of the things that companies do need to do when they're implementing or providing an AI type solution is they need to be able to address the issue of, so what's left to do? And they should interact with the website owner to tell them what's left to do and why it's important to do it, because that's part of the educational process for them learning why accessibility is important, and reminding them that in reality 20% of all persons in the United States and in the world have a disability, and you really don't want to leave those people out, because 20% more of your market share would be a wonderful thing.
Right. And
But
in theory, a website could use both
and,
approaches,
well, and should,
don't you think? I mean,
and
they
should.
could. I could conceive of a scenario where AI takes care of a lot of the routine stuff, and it gets smarter over time, as we hope AI will. And if there's really some in-depth, for example, I don't think AI can solve a CAPTCHA, the dreaded visual CAPTCHA that a lot of us complain about and
Right.
wish there was a different way. Right. So there's things that AI needs help with, and that's fine. I'm not in the group that says AI is all bad and all of that, but I am in the group that says if you neglect the human element, if you neglect the ongoing, I've done the work now, can I stop? And the answer is no, you
No,
cannot
you
stop.
cannot stop.
You
And I
must
agree
keep
with you.
going.
Absolutely agree with you. And so that's what I'm saying, though, that one of the things that people, it's human nature, right? Oh, I got this in and that's going to fix it. No, it doesn't. But I think that the AI solution can also look at the rest of the website and say, here's what I did, um, but here's what I don't yet know how to do. And so these are the things, Mr. or Miss or Mrs. website owner, um, you still have as issues that would make your website better, and then find or be helped to find people who can deal with those issues.
See, I'm thinking that when a end user touches a website that is supported by whatever AI or whatever accessibility is there, that we, the end users, need to have some clear way of knowing, number one, that it's there, and number
Mm-hmm.
two, who is the purveyor of it, and number three, if I find that it's getting in my way, how do I make it go away? And those three, and that's a sort of a sacrilegious thing to say for people who are backing AI, but since we all agree that AI is still on the road to getting better, there's got to be a clear,
Well, and code is
well-documented
on the
way.
road of getting better too. So
Yeah,
it's both.
yeah,
But yeah,
the road to Hong
and
Kong, whatever. Yeah,
or Morocco.
yeah.
But the issue is that I would rather it not be how do you make it go away, although I can understand that. I would rather it be how do we immediately get it fixed. And but if we can't, we do have to have a way to get around it. But I hope more often than not, it's the website owner has a mechanism on the website to be able to report issues, and that's a great discussion to have, but that will allow for immediate resolution of a problem. And so there has to be a lot more response to consumer issues and needs. And we all in this industry need to make sure that we provide better mechanisms for the response.
See, and there's the rub. I mean, to
Well,
get,
sure.
the people who provide accessibility services, whether it's an AI solution or whether it's some other solution, they get paid by the person who or
Right.
organization that is managing the website. We, the end users, aren't paying the consultants. We're not paying the overlay
Directly,
people. We're paying their customers, and so the overlay company will, or the consultant company, sees the customer, not the end user, as the revenue generator for them. And
which is
so,
unfortunate,
yeah, yeah, but that is the
but
reality.
that is the
Uh,
reality.
and I am fully supportive of having adequate channels of problem solving that enable the end users who aren't, contributing a nickel to this effort except by buying whatever it is the customer has to offer.
But
They
that's how the
need,
customers of the
yeah,
get
that's
their
how they
money to be
survive.
able to pay for it. So
Yeah,
we are the ultimate customer. I use the example this morning of, let's say you're a manufacturer of cat food. So who's your customer? Your customer is the person who buys the cat food. But the reality is, if the ultimate customer doesn't like the taste of that food, you can sell all you want, but it's not going to go very well because, so we're all customers and we need to be recognized as being part of the customer and consumer base both. That's really important. You know what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, we've got about 10 minutes.
No problem.
Let's open this to questions. And Jan, you're there. We're going to let you manipulate that if you would. But we'd like to have people raise their hands or if Jan, if you want to unmute people, however you want to do it. And let's see if we can get some questions. Or I suppose people can type in the chat box if they want.
Go ahead. So we actually have a question from Mary Ellen Gabias. I hope I pronounced it well.
You did a pretty good job.
You did a great job there, Jan. Perfect.
Thanks. I think you already answered the question, but I will read it anyway. So Mary says, my issue is that AI is not ready for prime time, but it is being oversold. Also, who controls the process? If an ignorant owner of a website hires a company that provide AI and it doesn't work very well, how does the consumer get responsive customer service? If this overlay technology was sold to a person or to the access technology provider, it seems that the lines of accountability would be much more clearly defined.
Well, it's a multi-part question in a way, and I'm sure Curtis has some things that he wants to say about it. But what I will say is, I'm not agreeing that AI isn't already ready for prime time in some ways. I think that what is an issue, however, is that it's an emerging and evolving thing. But the reality is,
oversold.
If you really want to get technical, so is coding, right?
Yes, that's right.
There are some research studies that show that coding is only about 16% successful today. That there are so many errors with the coders in the world that they're not really any different in the process. And so it is a problem across the board. And so really talking about one and not talking about the other is not a good thing. If you get technical, none of them are ready for prime time, but it is what we have. And there are things that AI can do. And a lot of times that we're finding that when people say AI doesn't do what they say it does, it isn't even an AI issue. So that becomes a different part of the process.
But my point is the end user doesn't really need to know.
But
what they need to know is, where do I go for help?
Exactly
right. Where do
I
go
when
problem. Somebody says that they have this great thing and I go to try it and it doesn't work, but I got to get something
exactly
done.
Right.
And as we all know, getting help in this day and age, I don't care whether you're blind or not. Just try calling Comcast, for example. And
really.
Or understanding exactly what I'm talking about.
Spectrum.
Spectrum, yeah.
But
right.
the issue is that if Elmo Schwartz, he gets around. I met him a long time ago and I use him, and he's really skilled. If Elmo Schwartz goes and makes a website accessible, and there's a problem on that site, and I encounter it as a consumer, I don't know about Elmo Schwartz. It's a problem across the board, and it is something that we do need to address. So I'm not really ready to say that AI is oversold, Mary Ellen, as much as I think that some people think it is because they think that things are being said that aren't. But I think that also what we need to do is to advocate on all sides of this for there to be better ways for we as consumers to get help.
I remember once Ray Kurzweil told me that he thought one day the computers would develop self-awareness. And I said, Ray, do you really want this? Think about history.
But now
he's got suppressed minorities.
But now he's got the singularity. So
which is where we're the computer. We're the computer. Okay, next person.
Who's got another question?
So we don't have any questions yet. So if anyone wants to ask something, feel free to write it in the chat.
This is your time.
Yeah.
We are right now. We've got about 5 minutes or so.
5 minutes, yeah. Then I got to run. I have a
and Curtis
talking
has
about
to run,
accessibility.
I
got to go fight for voting accessibility in the next hour. So,
anyone else have any questions that you want to ask?
A question that was asked here: ways to bridge the gap.
Well, the ways are that there are a number of solutions, and the first thing that needs to happen is that everyone needs to recognize the value of all of the different aspects that we've talked about here.
Ways to bridge the gap. There's I think we've talked about every single thing that must happen, like proper training of users, proper training of developers to incorporate accessibility. Those things really ought to happen. Enhancement of AI technology so that it can help solve those parts of the accessibility barrier that it can solve, and greater awareness on the part of the people who put up websites that accessibility needs to be something that they put in their thinking, not at the end after they've done all the work, but at the beginning. Everybody says over and over again, if you build accessibility in, it'll be cheaper to do in the long run. And that's true with ramps. It's equally true with this stuff. But so often, right? I don't care how, you don't see people thinking about accessibility until somebody kicks them or yells at them or does something. The first day of a project design, the word accessibility never pops up. If we don't fix that in the end, then we're still going to be winding up patching, which is what a lot of us are doing.
We built a house in 2016 where we live. And the house was designed to be accessible. But when the house was built and we moved in,
Alexa, stop.
When we moved in, the builder did not put my wife, by the way, uses a wheelchair. The builder did not put ramps at the front door and the back door of the house. And he said, well, but there are rules about being in flood zones and water could come up, all of which were totally wrong. And we had spent 6 months with this guy, but we still had to put our own ramps in by the time all was said and done. He should have done it. But the bottom line is that he wasn't thinking about this in an accessible and an enlightened accessible way. It happens. And it's something that we're always going to face until the world recognizes that it's time to be inclusive. And
or
then
until
we'll
we never have the disability that the accessibility is attempting to address, which is another thing that we could hope for maybe. I'm not sitting around wishing to have artificial eyes, but in the long run, maybe. So I want to thank you for putting this on. This has been a stimulating discussion for me.
It's been fun, and I think that we will try to do more of these in the future. If any of you have topics that you want us to discuss or that you want to promote in terms of stimulating topics, feel free to email me. It's michaelhi@accessiBe.com, michaelhi@accessiBe.com. And I want this to be the first in a series of these discussions. And we want to have more opportunity for you to be the people who tell us what you want to hear about. So again, I'd like to thank you. And Curtis, I really appreciate you being here and being a part of this. I think we got some great things accomplished today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and this was fun. Thank you.
Y'all take care, and please watch out for the next one and tell us what you want. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Curtis, and thanks everyone who joined us today. And we hope to have another webinar soon enough. And until then, have a great week.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Off to my next meeting. Bye, all.
There you go. Bye, Curtis.